academic events. We have been waiting till now, expecting that we could organize an offline conference, but now we are forced to run this conference on a digital platform in line with the social distancing norms of the due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Anyhow, now let me talk about the concept of the seminar. Now, the concept of the seminar, Transnationalism, Nation States, and the Global South, Literary and Cultural Dialogues, demands a more explicit and extensive attention to the spatio-temporal elements of migration and dislocation. Transnational studies have effectively examined flows of culture, ideas, capital, and people. To quote Priya Kapoor, transnationalism has become a target term that sheds light on the political, economic, cultural aspects of the study of human and social movements. Since the contemporary transnational discourses apprise not just the territorial, but also ideological postures of nation states that are unequally positioned in their economic growth and military strength, theorizing transnationalism becomes indispensable today, as it deals with knowledge production in academia and helps us elude the regimes of neoliberal globalization by forging new linkages of ideas and scholarship that define them. Now, transnationalism is, after all, not just a single act of making the invisible visible, but also one of taking back, recouping, and vigorously questioning the connections of the state and citizenship, of reconceptualizing identity and understanding technologically mediated relationships and commodified desires. It is not about an already defined set of relationships, but about imagining how power can fashion new subjects and resistances. Now, the phrase Global South refers broadly to the regions of Latin America, Asia, Africa, and Oceania. It is one of the family of terms, including Third World and Periphery, that denote regions outside Europe and North America, mostly, though not all of them, low income and often politically and culturally marginalized regions. The use of the phrase Global South marks a shift from its central focus on development and cultural difference towards an emphasis on geopolitical relations of power and to a political subjectivity that draws from the rhetoric of the so-called Third World Project or non-aligned and radical internationalist discourses of the Cold War. In this sense, the Global South may productively be considered a direct response to the category of post-coloniality in that it captures both a political collectivity and ideological formulation that arises from lateral solidarities among the world's multiple Souths, and moves beyond the analysis of the operation of power through colonial difference towards theories of power within contemporary global capitalism. Now, the critical scholarship that falls under the rubric of Global South Studies is invested in the analysis of the formation of a Global South subjectivity, the study of power and racialization within global capitalism in ways that transcend the nation states as a unit of comparative analysis and in tracing contemporary South-South relations or relations among, what do we say, the subaltern groups across national, linguistic, racial, and ethnic lines. Thus, The term Global South references an entire history of colonialism, neo-imperialism, and differential economic and social change through which large inequalities in living standards, life expectancy, and access to the resources are maintained. Now, this is a brief idea about our conference. And now, having said these preliminary remarks on the concept of this webinar, let me introduce and welcome our esteemed guest speakers of the day to you. Now, first of all, I would like to welcome our inaugural speaker, Professor EVR. We fondly call him EVR. Now, his wholehearted acceptance of our humble request was a moment of great joy in materializing this webinar. He's an academician who, despite being one among the giants in this field, is always down to earth and highly approachable. Now, talking about his professional career, Professor E V Ramakrishnan is a well-known bilingual writer with 10 books in English and 6 books in Malayalam, that is his mother tongue. Among his most recent books are Locating Indian Literature, Texts, Traditions, Translations, and Interdisciplinary Alternatives in Comparative Literature. Then he has more than 100 presentations and publications to his credit in various international journals as well as in international conferences. His areas of specialization are comparative literature, translation studies, cultural studies, post-colonial literatures, literary theory, and Malayalam literature. Translation studies, he has translated literary works, particularly poetry from Indian languages into English. Professor EVR has been the recipient of several awards and honors such as Kerala Sahitya Academy Award for Literary Criticism in 1995, then UGC Career Award for Young Scholars back in 1987, then Indian Institute of Advanced Study Fellowship in 1993, KK Birla Foundation Fellowship in 1999, and he was awarded a Fulbright Fellowship in 2001, and the Government of Canada Fellowship in 2012. He is a member of the Executive Council of the International Comparative Literature Association, ICLA, and he is also the advisory board member of Sahitya Academy New Delhi and several academic bodies in several universities across India. Now, having retired from Central University of Gujarat in 2015 as a professor and dean, and for some time the as a vice chancellor of the university, also he has been now serving there in Gujarat Central University as a professor emeritus. Now, today in our webinar, he is going to talk about the topic Liquid Transnationalism, the Space of Language and the Language of Space in Contemporary Culture. Sir, it's a great privilege to welcome you to this conference. Now, I would also like to extend our warm welcome to Professor Amith Kumar PV. Sir was telling me that he'll join for EVR's talk by 9:30. I don't know whether he is with us or not. Anyhow, Professor Amith Kumar, sir, he's been a teacher who inspired me to be always humble and kind towards the students and fellow human beings. He was my mentor and PhD guide at IFLU Hyderabad, the humane side of academics whose support and help made me what I am today. To talk about his professional career, Professor Amith Kumar PV now teaches at the Department of Comparative Literature and India Studies, School of Literary Studies in EFL University, Hyderabad. He spent time as a Fulbright visiting fellow at Portland State University in the USA from 2007 to 2008, and he has been a DAD visiting fellow at Technical University Dresden, Germany from April 2015 to July 2015. He has also published numerous research articles in various international journals, mainly on Mikhail Bakhtin's dialogic principles, with a focus on their extension and appropriation in the context of Indian literatures. His book titled Bakhtin and Translation Studies, Theoretical Extension and Connotation has received much critical acclaim among the scholars in the field of translation studies and modern literary theories. Now, he has presented papers at international conferences held in countries like Denmark, Finland, Greece, the USA, the UK, and Germany, and has delivered several keynote addresses at national conferences in India. And he's currently the principal director of the ICSSR, Indian Council for Social Science Research, sponsored a special project on disability studies in India. Now, today, in our webinar, he speaks on the topic Comparative Literature and the Global South, Perspectives and Possibilities. Sir, it's a great privilege to welcome you to our webinar. Now, the final speaker of this conference is Dr. Munir, a great friend and academic role model for not just me, but many of us while we were at IFLU campus during the 2012 and 14 years. Now, Dr. Munir is an assistant professor at the Department of English, Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh. His principal research interests lie in the areas of comparative literary and cultural studies, with a special focus on South Indian Muslim literary cultures. His PhD dissertation titled Politics of Piety, Genre, Devotion, and Self-Fashioning in the Mappila Literary Culture of South India examines devotional performance genres among the Malayalam-speaking Mappila Muslims in Kerala. His publications have appeared in international journals like the Journal of Royal Asiatic Society, published by Cambridge University Press, and he was also a recipient of the Fulbright Nehru Doctoral Fellowship in 2013 at the Department of Anthropology, University of California, Berkeley. Now, he serves as a member in different academic bodies like European Association for South Asian Studies, EASS Germany, and Indian Association for Commonwealth Literature and Language Studies, IACLALS, New Delhi. His topic for our today's webinar is Worlds and Words, Towards a Globalictics of the Vernacular Literary Imaginaries. Welcome you, Munir, sir. Now, I would also like to welcome our respected principal, Dr. K Aziz, who is always supportive and helpful for any academic endeavors we undertake. In a sense, he is the backbone of this institution in its running and in his readiness to help for any academic activity on the campus. Welcome you, sir. Then our head of the department, Samad sir, whose leadership and guidance, with his vibrant leadership and guidance, the department now conquers new heights of academic excellence. Welcome you, sir, for the formality's sake. I also like to extend our warm welcome to all my colleagues whose unwavering support actualized this webinar today. I also extend our welcome and greetings to all the participants who are with us today in this conference. I once again welcome all of you. Thank you all. I also invite I also invite our head of the department, Mr. Abdul Samad, to preside over the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Noufal. Good morning all. Honorable Chief Guest of the Day, E V Ramakrishnan, Professor Amith Kumar, Principal, and all other participants. I welcome all you to this program and a warm good morning to all. I understand that since we are on a digital platform, there is I really no idea who hosts the program or the kind of place where you are attending. So I would like to give you a brief on the Department of English, which will be very short, and we will go to the other items of the seminar. So the Department of English was founded in 1993 as a PG department, and later UG course was in fact included. And at the department, we make it a point that we have we have enough attention on the teaching learning process, the research activities, and definitely to improve the quality of teaching learning process by organizing workshops and all. So this year, I'm proud to say that this year, around 12 of our students have got enrolled into reputed universities in India, including Jawaharlal Nehru University, Central University of Hyderabad, English and Foreign Language University. So we make it a point that the teaching learning process is given adequate attention. At the same time, we are also focused on the research activities to have a kind of academic endeavor in the department so that our students are triggered to go further in the fields of their research area. Last year, we have an international conference in which Man Booker Prize winner Joka Al-Hadi attended. Similarly, we are organizing programs where students are in fact triggered to go in search of newer fields of academic study. In the same vein, we organize workshops for teachers whenever there is a kind of new initiative at the university level to initiate new courses, programs, and all. We organize workshops so that the quality of teaching is also improved. So this is a moment that the Department of English, PSMO College, is very happy to have Professor E V Ramakrishnan on this platform for solely two reasons. When we were thinking about a webinar on Global South, we thought that it requires a resource person who has focus at the specificities of local cultures, the nuances of indigenous cultures. At the same time, someone who has a hold on, let me say, the broader perspectives. So what attracts us to E V Ramakrishnan is that he was in fact very sensitive to the cultural nuances of Indian regional literatures. At the same time, he had always talked about a broader perspective. I would like to quote one of his, I would like to cite an example from his work, Malayalam novel, Deshavum Kalavum, in which he was talking about, since the induction of literary theory, we are very much, we in fact subject literary texts to rigorous analysis and micro-analysis in that sense, but we often ignore to incorporate a macro level analysis, a broader perspective into our literary studies. So I believe that Professor E V Ramakrishnan will definitely give us a broader outlook without, let us say, ignoring the minute details of regional Indian literatures. And at another moment, we believe that this webinar is very, very significant on two levels. One, that in the Global South, we have a large plethora of regional identities. All the countries that belong to this particular term are in fact holding different identities, and these identities are often fragmentary, and this often result into a sort of political problem as these fragmented identities often create bigger political problems. So we believe that this webinar will definitely throw light into these aspects of identities, political dislocations, and such matters that are very relevant in the national scenario of our country. So before we move further to the program, let me turn to my duty that I would like to invite our principal, beloved principal, Dr. Aziz K, to his principal address. Sir?
Okay. Samad, audible?
Yeah, audible, sir.
Okay. Good morning, all. Most respected Professor E V Ramakrishnan, sir, Professor Emeritus, Central University of Gujarat, respected Professor Amith Kumar, Department of Comparative Literature, IFLU, respected Dr. Munir, Department of English, Aligarh Muslim University, dear Mr. Abdul Samad, who is chairing the function, Head of the Department of English, dear Dr. Noufal, coordinator for today's webinar, other faculty members of other colleges joined, research scholars, and dear students. Really, we are moving through the difficult situation in our life because of the pandemic situation. We have no previous experience. We all know an academic year 2021 is going to be finished. More than 60% time already over. I'm very happy to mention here that the Department of English of the PSMO College, I would like to mention, as far as the faculty number, the biggest department of our college, used to organize various effective programs during the past years. As mentioned by Dr. Noufal, during this academic year, already they have submitted me in their action plan, organizing a good seminar, as did during last years. But they waited till November, waiting for conducting an offline program that will be more benefited. That is when students are getting a chance to interact with eminent professors face to face. That will be more better. But this pandemic situation made us a lot of changes, especially the utilization of online platforms, organization of web-dependent seminars, etc., etc. That is a positive side of the pandemic. In our teaching learning program, all these activities are very much effective, especially today's seminar. One of webinar on a most relevant topic, transnationalism, nation states, and global south, literary and cultural dialogues. I request all participants to make use of this program effectively, participating, interact with the eminent resource persons, and try to grab maximum out of today's webinar. I also take this opportunity to congratulate the head of the department, Mr. Samad, and all other faculty members of the Department of English for organizing a webinar on this topic mentioned. And also I express my thanks from the principal side to Professor E V Ramakrishnan sir, Professor Amith KumarPV, and also Dr. Munir AK for their willingness to join for a program of PSMO. And also, sir, I request all of you to cooperate, sir. We need your help and blessings. Especially our department is going to become a research center this year. We need your help and blessings, sir, during future years to come. With these words, I express all the very best to this webinar, and let me conclude. Thank you very much. Samad?
Okay, sir.
Okay.
You have to enable me. Okay. It's my privilege to invite Professor E V Ramakrishnan to deliver his lecture, and to invite him to inaugurate the program and also to deliver the keynote address. He will be talking to us on liquid transnationalism, the space of language and the language of space in contemporary culture. Over to you, sir. Sir?
Can you hear
Hello?
me now?
Yeah,
Can you hear
audible.
me?
Or we can.
Yeah. Even if you can't see me, you should hear me.
No, we see you, we hear you. It's fine.
Thank
Perfect.
you. Yeah. I would like to congratulate PSMO Tirurangadi for holding this very important discussion on a very relevant topical subject, which has implications not only for English literature departments, but also for sociology or economics or even film studies and several other disciplines. It's an interdisciplinary topic which you have chosen for this conference or this webinar, which is a very, very positive kind of development. Dr. K Aziz, Principal, PSMO, Mr. Abdul Samad, Head of the English Department, Dr. Mohamed Noufal, Professor Amith Kumar, I hope, has joined. He has been a good friend for a long time from IFLU. Dr. Munir from Aligarh University, colleagues in the English department and other colleges, if they are part of this program, students and friends. I am happy to be part of this webinar on transnationalism, nation states, and the global south, literary and cultural dialogues. As an emergent category, terms transnationalism, or even literary transnationalism have found currency across many disciplines, such as culture studies, comparative literature, film studies, translation studies, and theater studies, etc. As we discuss this topic amidst a worldwide pandemic, categories such as nation and nation state, which have been in flux in the wake of globalization, appear to be poised for further transformation. That is a subject which we are not going to address, but it will be tangentially addressed in some of the points we make. Research in social sciences have contributed much to our understanding in the new century, though in humanities, it is diaspora studies and film studies that have taken lead in understanding this complex phenomenon of transnationalism. However, I would like to raise the question, maybe toward the end of my presentation, Is transnationalism an altogether new phenomenon that is traceable only to the after effects of globalization?
Hello, sir. Your audio is not getting, sir. You are mute now. Hello? Hello? You hear, sir? We are not able to hear you.
Can you hear now?
Yes, sir, it's audible now.
Audible now. Yeah, it got
Yes, sir.
muted. I don't know.
Okay.
I'll repeat some of the last two sentences. Toward the end of my presentation, I would also address this question. Is transnationalism an absolutely recent phenomenon, or are there in the past comparable stages of what you call transnational traffic of ideas or persons or goods, etc.? Or are they to be understood as separate, discrete entities that do not share any common features? I would like to begin with a working definition of transnationalism as given by Stephen Vertovec in his book, Transnationalism, 2009. And he says, transnationalism may be defined as, quote, sustained cross-border relationships, patterns of exchange, affiliations, and social formations spanning nation states, unquote. As can be seen in this definition, the sovereignty of the nation state and the inviolability of the sanctified idea of the nation have been subjected to critical examination in the transnational perspective. Of course, there are in the theoretical kind of discussions that have gone on in the last decade throughout. This is largely a discipline which has emerged in the 21st century. And when I look back in the last decade of discussion, there is also a triumphalist, celebratory aspect to transnationalism. Is transnationalism all liberationist or emancipatory? So this question also has been discussed in the recent theoretical literature. The triumphalist approach to transnationalism as an emancipatory concept has also been challenged, as crossing of borders does not invalidate nations or nation states. This idea that one can leave behind the constraints of nations and nation states by crossing borders, definitely sustained cross-border relationships are at the core of transnationalism. But how far does it invalidate the idea of the nation state? This question needs to be remembered. Is transnationalism a facile celebration of globalization? This is another issue which has actually come up, because globalization uses concepts such as diversity and hybridity to legitimate the free movement of global capital. The very idea of global capital is at the core of globalization, and this multiculturalism or the idea of hybridity or even diversity, difference, these are catchwords which circulate in a globalized environment of university academic kind of disciplines. Are universities complicit with this dimension of what we call globalization, which uses culture to legitimate the very movement of global capital? This is an aspect which has worried many thinkers. And that is why some critics have actually have been suggesting we should perhaps reclaim the idea of transnationalism using terms like critical transnationalism or traversing transnationalism or adversative transnationalism. We should reclaim it as a critical concept capable of scrutinizing the nature of circulations and crossings among different spaces, different scales, and different temporalities. This is a task which academics who are committed to global South cannot completely ignore. If we are to bring in the dimension of global South into the idea of the transnational as a category, we need to scrutinize the nature of circulations and crossings among different spaces. Who speaks on behalf of the transnational? Whose voice is heard in the transnational space? And for whom does it finally, in a way, stand in the exchange of ideas, concepts, goods, and even materials? So transnational, in a way, tangentially touches upon a semiotic system that subsumes the traffic of not only goods and humans, along with those of ideas and concepts, but also dreams, aspirations, models, styles, and even perspectives. In that, transnational is an enabling and empowering concept. It can decenter the solid and the rooted, the ethnocentric and the inward-looking, in favor of a more equitable and also a more egalitarian cosmology that is very much rooted in the lived reality of the global South. It is this function of transnational that embodies a view of life and art as flux and flow that needs further engagement, particularly as we are using the perspective of the global South. But before proceeding further, let me briefly outline we are entering a thicket of terminology, so it is important to clarify and also look at the relation between globalization and transnationalism on the one hand, and nation and transnationalism on the other. We have some of these key terms. For example, diaspora. Diaspora naturally comes into the domain of this terminology. And nation, nation state. And also there is this larger question of how are all they mutually related. So for students who actually would be listening to a discussion on this kind of a topic, I think it's important to understand the distinctions between some of these very important key terms. Globalization marks a moment in world history when revolutionary changes of production, uninterrupted flow of information, goods and people across borders of nations, and consequent political, social, and cultural turbulence have impacted the everyday world of people, including their livelihood and freedom of choice, to an extent which was never seen in human history. In discussing the transnational as an element of contemporary culture, we confront the larger issue of the hegemonic impulse of globalization, particularly in matters of culture and knowledge. T.K. Umman has argued that, I quote, globalization which prescribes universal norms and which pursues cultural homogenization cannot have inclusion as its value orientation. So one of the questions which sociologists have also addressed is to what extent is globalization an inclusive phenomenon? And that's where we, in a way, find a dark underbelly of the global capital, in a way, conceals from our view a certain kind of dark underbelly of extreme exploitation, extreme kind of dehumanization. Just to make this idea clear to a lot of students who may know, a novel in Malayalam called Adu Jeevitham, available in English as Got Days. This was perhaps in Malayalam the first novel which in a way burst the bubble of the globalized world from a perspective from below, from the excluded, from the marginalized, from a locale which was never available to the triumphal view of the Gulf Malayali as the dream merchant, the person who has actually affluent and liberated so much, etc. So this idea of transnational or globalized world as emancipatory has, on the other side, a dark underbelly of wherever you go. You see, in America, you can see Mexicans, mostly people who have no valid, maybe papers, who are actually available for cheap labor. Much of American companies in California, in many border states, they need manpower, and they depend on this kind of cheap labor. So migrant labor, this is a phenomenon across Europe and North America and developed world as a whole. So South Asian diaspora, here you can see the some of the question which becomes very, very complex. Is in a globalized world, transnational communities have inbuilt tensions between them. What when you look at novels like Adu Jeevitham or many other, some of them I will mention, you will find the global South, as revealed by study of diaspora, needs to reimagine space from a perspective that does not surrender to the compulsion of the neoliberal narratives sponsored by globalized capital. And that's where the films or the art and culture kind of products, they have largely questioned to what extent this globalized world itself provides a level playing field. We will actually address this question. So we need to address the complex moral choices before socially committed, intellectually inclined activists caught in the violent contradictions of civil wars, which have their origin in the atavistic passions that shape the post-colonial nations of the global South. So the question of migration itself, in a way, takes us back to these internal contradictions and very complex kind of civil turbulence, disturbances in large number of countries, which actually now have been displaced into the transnational space. Many of those issues have their origin within the nation. If we look at, I won't have time to look at, but again, I mentioned a very important Malayalam novel. T.D. Ramakrishnan has written a novel called Sugandhi Enna Andal Devanayaki. I think it's available in English translation also, 2014. It looks at the Sri Lankan, the civil war in Sri Lanka between Sri Lankans and Tamils. But now in the transnational space, this novel actually has a character who comes from Paris, who actually looks at this, who is making a film on, that's a long story, I don't want to get into that, but it is a complex narrative which have many strands, mythical, historical, political, diasporic, and this question of the ethical agency of the migrant and the way he actually relates to the point of origin and its relation to the host country. All these become very complex kind of circuits which inform literature of the transnational. How far is nation as an analytical category central to the idea of transnational? Nadia Lai observes that the relation between national and transnational practices and realities is not dichotomic, but mutually constitutive. In the context of film studies, Will Hybe and a few other theoretical writers have argued that transnationalism helps in configuring and articulating a politics of difference that opens up, quote, the unstable and shifting identifications between host and home, individual and community, global and local, and indeed national and transnational, as well as the tensions these generate. I will very briefly look at later, within a few maybe, there is a film by Meera Nair called Mississippi Masala, and that will actually explain how this politics of difference plays up, or it actually informs the transnational space. As a relational concept, transnationalism does not concern spaces beyond nation alone, but operates within the local, national, and regional and supranational context. We will be making a mistake if we think transnational is something out there as supranational. But we will have to actually look at it maybe at multiple levels of spatial configurations in modern society. Here, let us also make a distinction between international and transnational. Maybe some students may be thinking, why use a term like transnational when we have a term like international? But let's actually clarify that international relations imply interactions between nation states and official agencies, whereas transnational relations imply sustained linkages and ongoing exchanges among non-states and non-state actors across national boundaries. So it can be artists, it could be migrants, it could be a whole set of other people who do not have traditional kind of rootedness in one nation. So transnationalism has made a difference to the way we conceive of space. As studies on migration, migrancy, identity, and diasporic networks testify. In the last few decades, the cultural impact of diasporas have been extensively studied. However, transnational as a category is different from diaspora or diaspora as a category. While a core ethnic identity defines a diasporic formation, this core identity of an ethnicity is central to diaspora. A transnational community transcends such emotional categories and relies on larger professional or class interests. South Asian diaspora is transnational as it transcends national boundaries, but it splinters into several diasporic communities when they are faced with issues of ethnic identity involving religion, region, memory, history. So when it comes to the idea of the homeland, the transnational community can fragment into multiple diasporic sites. Look at the American kind of a transnational community of South Asians. But there are deep ethnic fault lines that divide the collective transnational identity. So they hold divergent loyalties, affiliations, and commitments in their self-narratives of origin, ethnicity, and nationhood. Migration and diaspora and transnationalism share common elements, but differ substantially in their orientations. The myth of a homeland is central to the idea of diaspora. As I said, the ethnic identity or the myth of the homeland, these are central to the idea of diaspora. Whereas transnationalism signifies movement, flux, and flow without a frame of reference rooted in either nation or nation state as a point of origin. It doesn't refer back to a moment of the past, which actually is rooted in a national, a space of the nation. And this brings me closer to the idea of liquid nationalism or liquid transnationalism, which as a category has evolved out of Zygmunt Bauman's idea of liquid modernity. Here, the person who proposed the idea of liquid modernity was a sociologist called Zygmunt Bauman, and he was largely speaking in the context of a consumerist society deeply implicated in the culture of spectacle and carnival without having any rootedness. Increasingly in the globalized space, you find there is a kind of lightness of being. There is, we are in the, maybe as a society, Malayalis or Indians as a whole, maybe on the cusp of a transition from solid to liquid modernity, solid to liquid kind of transnationalism, as a normative that regulates the individual actions in accordance with the social and the collective, has given way to unlimited personal freedom. But this freedom is also, there is always conditions apply, you see. So the idea of personal freedom itself, as you know, as people who use Facebook or internet or WhatsApp and so many other Twitter, you know that the unlimited is quote unquote with conditions attached. The markers of modernity, if you actually, I will try to explain how, and this whole idea of solid and liquid actually becomes, the markers of modernity were monuments to order, stability, totality, and control. Let's look at the period between 1800 to maybe 1950 or even 1960s. This is the time when we have a certain manifestations of modernity in terms of cultural products, including sculpture, architecture. Look at the kind of, that is when nation and nation state emerged. So the markers of modernity were monuments to order, stability, totality, and control, which consecrated instrumental rationality. And that is how the idea of the individual itself was born in this kind of a context. Please mute your. So the idea of modernity itself gave rise to the idea of the individual in this context of an instrumental rationality. This enabled the individual to emerge into a locus of her own within the collective panoptical order. This was, as Foucault would actually say, an order which had surveillance of the subjects built into the system itself. And the price modern nation states paid for its stability and order can be seen in the potential of this kind of systems for absolute totalitarian control, creating colossal and oppressive structures such as Stalinist state or Nazi concentration camp. So you find modernity at its very heart also gave rise to a solid order. Look at bureaucracy, for example, in India, which stabilizes the idea of the nation into a kind of controlled, regulated space. But look at the oppressive nature. We are face to face with its opacity all the time. And this space is what also individual has to actually enter all the time to negotiate his agency, his freedom. So what appeared as unlimited freedom finally was reduced to a large spectrum of controls which were fragmented across many kind of authorities, all finally meeting at a very panopticon kind of central, overseeing, overarching collective nation state. But as modernity loses its state of rootedness, and this has happened largely through the change in the mode of production, change information technology, decolonization across the world, and the emergence of global capital and its inborn need to negotiate multiple locations across the world. All this collectively, let us say in the post-1960, 1970, and in a pronounced manner post-1990, it gave rise to a state of what you call liquid modernity. And that's where Mohamed says this alienation, which was already seen as a defining feature of modernity, deepens into a greater kind of malaise, greater kind of morbid pattern in this. And the utopian impulse which characterized the modern has finally dissolved. There is a dissolution of the bonds that interlinked individual choices in collective projects and action. You can see there are no more identifiable. Let me give examples so that students will understand this. Look at the Ford factory. They produce cars, the conveyor belt. So a person laborer who joins a Ford factory, he will work there for 30 years and maybe 40 years. He knows his location, he sees what he is making, he knows he is part of what kind of a system. Maybe the laborers can form a union, they can even go on strike, or at least they know who is the oppressor. Now look at somebody who joins Microsoft as a laborer. Of course, he actually is an engineer. You see, all that he is given is a laptop, a password, and he is part of what we call the empire called Microsoft. And he may not even know what kind of a project he is on or he is in. He may not even know in the hierarchy where he is located. And all that he actually is aware of is a set of, in a way, do's and don'ts, which define his nature of work and the culture of his space. But beyond that, he has no agency. So the individual choices, maybe he is actually making the software for a biological weapon, or I'm just giving an example, or maybe even a medicine which will help people to face the pandemic. So the question which the individual is able to negotiate, his space of negotiation has shrunken. And with this, there is also a culture as an endless spectacle. You see, whether it is 24/7 news or entertainment, there is hardly any break. And the very idea of a future, which actually is a better future, this was a kind of promise, a promised land. Modernity always had this in mind. But that no more holds true. If you look at in the last 20 or 30 years, even in Kerala, you see some of the successful struggles have been led by not organized political parties. Look at the struggle against Coca-Cola, the Changara, I think I am using the Kerala village which rose against the multinational company. There were Harvard research papers on this movement because it is something path-breaking. So the resistance now comes from non-normative kind of spaces. The political action itself. Look at labor unions now. In the last 2-3 months, labor laws have been amended in such drastic ways that you can be hired or fired. You can be asked to work for 12 hours. There is no guarantee of job security. And many things which people assumed were given in a kind of organized work environment. And there is this deep feeling of a deep feeling of fragmentation. You see, the Bakhtin's idea of the carnival was highly emancipatory. There is a kind of transformative element which actually animates the carnival space. But in the spectacle of the postmodern, because what we term liquid modernity in a way is analogous, it doesn't coincide. A number of terms have actually come because we call it second modernity, sometimes post-modernity, late modernity, modernity at large. So there have been a felt need to see that we have now crossed a threshold. We have moved beyond. So look at architecture. You see, look at some of the major constructions, huge factories, airports, or maybe modernities on dams and several, look at architecture. They have a solid quality about it. Look at postmodern architecture. They look so fragile. they use glass. I don't know whether if you have traveled, even in Kerala cities, you can see glass is now used across metropolitan spaces to create architectural. There are buildings which look as if they are broken, as if they are fragmented, as if they are already, you don't know where you have to enter. In Toronto, I've seen museums and many such spaces, monumental, not monumental, they are fragmentary. The modernity created monumental kind of solid architectural spaces. And it is in this context, Zygmunt Bauman, he says, what was some time ago dubbed as, he says erroneously, post-modernity, and what I have chosen to call more to the point liquid modernity, is a growing conviction that change is the only permanence and uncertainty the only certainty. 100 years ago, to be modern meant to chase the final state of perfection. There was this utopian impulse. You can improve. You can actually go better yourself. And now it means an infinity of improvement with no final state in sight and none desired. It's not even desired. I give an example here. There's a museum for mobiles. I think it's in New York, where the 2010 model is already exhibited as a curiosity. So 2010 is remote past. So it's already, maybe your 2017 model mobile is already obsolete. So this speed with which we actually, so when we say liquid post-modernity or liquid modernity, we are entering a space where it's not shift from heavy, solid, hardware-focused modernity to light, liquid, software-based modernity. It has built into the system remoteness, inaccessibility, and opacity, draining the possibility of human togetherness and life politics. The very idea of collective politics, the very idea of, that's why, you see, if you look at the Pink Revolution, the collective kind of action we have seen in the last 2 decades, they were all not led by organized political parties. They were spontaneous. There were these Occupy Wall Street kind of movements. They were spontaneous and leaderless, sometimes rudderless. And some of them die out, again come back. So in this kind of a liquid transnational space, you do not know how. Look at the Hong Kong kind of situation, where they are actually up against a huge multinational, a world power called China, and they are using spaces. Mostly leaders are young people, sometimes even teenagers you find among them, and mostly they are all below 30. So there is, and they are all faceless. You cannot identify a single leader unless you say, look at South Africa. Nelson Mandela is a heroic kind of, he had a heroic kind of struggle, a life. Maybe we can no more produce a Gandhi or a Nelson Mandela in the prevailing kind of cultural spaces across the world. But ideas still circulate. One of the defining features of a nation state is that it has sovereign authority over a territory which is bounded within a border. Its cultural rootedness is defined through linguistic nationalism that assumes various forms in arts and culture. However, and this is where in transnationalism, one element which makes it liquid is language. However, language cannot be contained within a territory, as it can be part of a flow or a flux that creates transnational spaces. I quote from Amaury Dehoe, who has written an essay called Liquid Spaces, Rethinking Transnationalism in an Era of Globalization. And I quote, one of the main characteristics of the language is its fluidity. Speech is usually defined as a flow of words, unquote. Through language, the flow replaces territory, and through its mobility, the language allows to think beyond an idea of fixation or fixity. Now, you can name any number of novelists, Rushdie, Rohindran Mistry, Sidhwa, or Boman Desai, whose homelands are imaginary because the solid rootedness in territoriality has given to a dispersal across transnational locations, fluidly held together in languages which are either learned or acquired. I give here an example which you may have not heard. There is a French writer, Alain Mebanco. I have read only one of his novels in translation. He was born in Congo, and he knew 6 African languages at the age of 5, all tribal, maybe usually local. And then he joins, Congo is a francophone kind of country. So he learned French at school, then went to Paris to study law, took an advanced degree in business law, began working in a multinational firm. And he also began publishing in French, his adopted language, both poetry and fiction. His books have won awards, and he has become a full-time writer now. Actually, he is now a professor of Francophone literature in University of California, I think at Los Angeles. He writes in Congolese French. Congolese kind of the French which has a kind of deep affiliation with the Congo territory, using very little punctuation, only commas. and because that is how Congo people, natives of Congo, speak. My Mother's Funeral, one of the novels, and God Only Knows How I Sleep, another. So his example I cite here, mainly it helps us to understand transnational writer as a deterritorialized nomad. There is a nomadic element built into the plight of the writer in the transnational spaces. And in African culture, each man or woman is associated with a bird or animal. And Mabanko describes himself as a migratory bird. This is one of the metaphors he uses. And this kind of a transnational writer, Mabanko says he is fulfilling a built-in potential by writing in a transnational kind of context in French, which has deep affiliation with Congo or Congolese kind of life. As a nomad, the transnational writer enters the flow, locating his native space within language, within hybridity and polyphony of his multi-vocal idiom that speaks of multiple border crossings. I quote Mabanko, who says, "We will no longer come from a certain country, from a certain continent, but from a certain language." Maybe this is the future of transnational writers. They are nomadic writers. We already have writers like Pico Iyer, you see, who once said, when he's in airport, he doesn't know whether he's going or coming. This is a very complex kind of situation. How much time can I take? 10 to 15 minutes more? I hope, am I exceeding my time?
No, sir. We will wind up around 11, right?
Okay.
And we may go for a discussion after 5 or 10 minutes.
I may take a little more, 5 to...
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. You see, I also want to draw your attention to Arjun Appadurai, who actually has a very interesting essay called Disjuncture and Difference in the Global Cultural Economy. And he has, you see, he actually, in one essay, he says, the world we live in now seems rhizomic. You see, Deleuze and Guattari has used the word of rhizome. You see, rhizome doesn't have one taproot. You see, you have the tree diagram, which a tree has one deep main taproot which goes into. But then there are also plants which, as our principal may understand this better, they have a number of roots branching out in different directions. So he says the world we live in now seems rhizomic, even schizophrenic, calling for theories of rootlessness, alienation, and psychological distance between individuals and groups on the one hand, and fantasies of electronic propinquity on the other. And that is why the question, he says the past is now not a land to return to in a simple politics of memory. The idea of memory itself now is a contested space. Whose memory? And how do you retract it? It has become a synchronic warehouse of cultural scenarios. You can retrieve the kind of memory you need. And he also says how the word imagination has become very central to many theoretical kind of concepts. If you look at the word, you say there is the Lacanian idea of imaginary, Anderson's idea of imagined community, or Frankfurt School's sense of the old idea of images, mechanically produced images. So in a way, our collective representations are now mediated through complex prism of modern media. So the word imagination, transnational space, in many ways is also mediated through a kind of imagination as the only dimension, human dimension, It becomes a form of negotiation between sides of agency and globally defined fields of possibility. So the imagination is now, says Arjuna Padurai, central to all forms of agency. It is itself a social fact and is a key component of the new global order. And then, of course, he also makes, he has given us a certain framework. I will just give a quotation and then come back to my argument. See, he says, I propose that an elementary framework for exploring, he said there is a disjunction at the very point of this imagination and the transnational space, the reality of transnational space. And to understand it, he says, for exploring such disjunctions is to look at the relationship between 5 dimensions of global cultural flow. And he says, number 1, ethnoscape, then mediascape, technoscape, financescapes, and ideoscapes. In largely, it actually means the flow of ethnic related human kind of flow. Media, another flow or network. Technology, another. These are constitutive of the transnational space. Finance, you see, with a click, you can transfer money from one part of the world to the other. Then comes ideas, aspirations, imagination. So these, how are they very impacting the whole question of, you see, that is why when we look at a writer like Mabanko, the local, that is Congolese, is preserved within his global French idiom. So the Congolese and the French, they are not separable. So the dialectic between the language of space and the space of language involves a simultaneous departure and return. So in a way, he was finding a space for his Congolese, the many languages he had learned and forgotten through the inflections he added to the French. And that is where I will not, I had a section on, if you look at the Japanese English writer Kazuo Ishiguro. Ishiguro got Nobel Prize a few years back. And look at how Japan informs his first novel, A Pale View of Hills, is on actually what you call Nagasaki, memory of Nagasaki as his hometown before the atom bomb fell. And look at how Japanese, the kind of comics he read in Japanese, the kind of stories, myths he heard. It's a remembered Nagasaki in that novel. So again, I just quote Ishiguro. He says, I'm now sure that it was this feeling that my Japan was unique and at the same time terribly fragile, something not open to verification from outside, that drove me on to work in that small room on this novel. It was my wish to rebuild my Japan in fiction, to make it safe. So you retrieve a space through a language, and that is only, so languages are in a way central to this entire process. Let me also bring, and I will end with this example, look at, and this will also explain the relation between migration and transnational space. I will briefly mention Meera Nair's Mississippi Masala here to suggest the nature of border crossings the Indian transnational community has to negotiate. In this film, with an international cast, Jay and Kinna, along with their daughter Meena, are forced to flee Uganda after Idi Amin takes over the country. After a brief stay in England, they relocate in Mississippi, where Jay joins the mortal business of his relatives. Jay yearns to return to Kampala, which he thinks is his home. Meanwhile, Meena, his daughter, has found local friends and is soon in love with Demetrius, who is actually, his real name is Denzel Washington, who is a self-employed African-American carpet cleaner. And her family and the Indian community as a whole are outraged by this interracial romantic relationship. When Meena falls in love with a black man, it is unacceptable. Despite the fact that Jay has been exposed to racism in Uganda, he cannot accept an American black into his family. Meena and Demetrius run away from the city. Now Jay comes back to Kampala in connection with a court case and is horrified to see that the city has changed beyond recognition. He can no more identify with the new city. So he has no homeland now. Kampala is no more. It exists only in his memory. He returned to Mississippi as someone who has no place to call his own. You see, look at in 2 generations, migration from India to Africa, Africa to England via America, and then to America. And the 3rd generation has already become localized, and they have absolutely no memories of either India or Kampala or Uganda. And this kind of literature raises questions of, how do you really, maybe English is one language which allows a certain kind of space to be concretized. The only kind of actualization of space possible in this transnational kind of environment where writer or filmmaker is a nomad it's the land of imagination. Only language becomes the only concrete kind of reality. Of course, there are questions which right now I have no space. Vijay Mishra has asked, we need to ask who speaks for whom. In diaspora literature, where can we be located? Where are diasporic bodies located in a multicultural nation state? Where is his agency finally located? Does he have an agency to reclaim what he actually, an identity, identifiable kind of bonding with real world outside? These are questions which we have to leave open. So in the larger, I have only opened up the subject. There are any number of, one of the questions which I wanted to raise toward the end is, there is also a transnationalism which takes us back in time. But that, of course, when Gundert comes to India, and he was even a school inspector, even Battuta, when he came to Malabar, he says he has seen African who is functioning in Calicut as a judge. Not Calicut, it is in Erimala. You see, Erimala, the place actually very close to my hometown, Payanur, there is the first Muslim mosque was built there, Malik Dinars. There is an inscription there. And not only that, it also has a Jewish presence. You see, so these are in students who are Malayalis, they should actually explore. You see, there is a transnational past, which perhaps was of a very different kind. You see, it was easier for Kerala to access what we call Gulf countries or Arabia, because we had sea route, which will take you, MGS Narayan says, in 40 days you can reach Gulf countries or Arabia. If you want to reach Benares, it takes 1 year, and there's no guarantee you will return. So Kerala had very deep transnational relation, the very idea that we belong to India is very, very recent. And that is why when we look at a book like Sheikh Zainuddin Makhdoom's Tufatul Mujahideen, you see, and MGS Narayan says this is a book, one of the finest history books to be written from Kerala. It is written in Arabic. Now it's available in translation. I'm just showing it. This book is available in English translation, originally written in Arabic from Kerala. You see, look at the transnational affiliation. And you see, Sheikh Zainuddin Makhdoom was a contemporary of Kerala's Edutachan. And you see, he must have been born around either Chombal or Panani, we don't know, around 1570, late 16th century. And we have a transnational history right here in North Kerala. And Makhdoom knew Arabic, Persian, many Indian languages, was a great scholar of Quran. And he was, if you look at the book, it's an exhortation for an anti-colonial struggle, an open war against the Portuguese. And in second section of the book, he gives a history of Islam in Malabar. And in third part of the book, he gives a social structure of the Hindu community. All the caste system, from Brahmins to the Dalits, he describes all of them, their manners, the different rituals. And in the fourth section, he talks about the relation between Zamorin and Kunjali Marakar, the whole history of how Kunjali Marakar actually waged battles. Look at a book of this kind being written in Arabic. And he was, you see, there were this kind of circulation, which now become, in our transnational context, we need to look back and reclaim that kind of history, which makes Kerala part of Indian Ocean kind of history. Sanjay Subramaniam has been looking at it. Sanjay Subramaniam actually is a very important historian. Let me stop here. I have given a hint of what are the possibilities. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope I opened up some subject for you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, sir.
Yeah.
It was really very insightful. You have outlined the different aspects of the Global South studies, its politics, spatiality, agency definitely. And as usual, you have ended with the pre-modern cosmopolitanism of the Malabar coast. As I said in the introduction, that you have been talking about the historical context that happened on the Malabar coast and then the flow of global capital all over. Now, I hope we can have a short session for questions, right, sir? Is it okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, the floor is, yeah, come on, sir.
I encroached on the question time. I'm sorry for that.
Yeah, it's all right, sir. We have scheduled the next session at 11:30, so
Yeah.
we have time.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, the floor is open for discussion. I request 10 minutes for questions. Okay, you can unmute your mic and ask questions. Participants, please unmute your mic and you may ask questions.
Samad sir, may I ask a question?
Please.
Sure, Jawahar. Proceed.
Okay. Present. But on the other hand, in the past couple of years, we could see a strong re-emergence of the nation state. Both the right wing and the left wing have taken a strong stand against globalization. Britain has walked out. America is building border walls. So are we seeing a reverse trend now?
Yeah, this is a very important question, which I hinted. And these tendencies have deepened in the period of the pandemic. I think in the last 5 to 10 years, these tendencies have always been there. But the emergence of the right-wing ideology across Europe and North America, particularly in the US, it has actually complicated the nature of globalization. Perhaps one of the reasons for this sudden emergence of the right-wing ideology was the kind of ideological spaces which could challenge the narrative of the right-wing the groups. They have become discredited. Look at both China and Russia. They have actually joined the global world, and they have absolutely nothing to do with leftist kind of ideology anymore. And even in South America, you see mostly the kind of the societies which had socialist kind of ideologies, they are also corrupted to the core. So in the absence of a certain kind of ideological assertion on behalf of, I think there are groups. This is one we also should not lose sight of, the sites of resistance which are emerging on the fringe, on the periphery. Societies, one of the things transnational kind of a world promises, it is, as I said, rhizomic. It is no more, nation states agency is now being challenged from within. You see, there can be potentially, for example, look at youth. In India, the question, the youth of today may not have many memories of, even this is an advantage as well as a disadvantage. None of them may actually know what happened in early 90s in Babri Masjid kind of context. So they have memories of a different kind. They have only seen the global IT kind of surge. Potentially, youth is a section which actually is still unpredictable and not totally annexed to the nation state's ideological kind of proclivity. You see, this is true in the US or in many. So there are potentially many, such sites which can use mass media, that is why the curbs on mass media are very, very much, many nation states want to use it as a kind of, it's being weaponized by those on the margins, and nation states are trying to. So apparently, the right-wing ideology has surged ahead, but then there are inherent, look at the way Trump has been halted in his unbridled, racist kind of push to the most nefarious instincts and impulses in what they call globalized society. So I do feel, there are elements, there are feminist groups, there are transgender groups, there are any number of ecological activists. The ecology itself is environmental activism that's emerging. So let us actually see, that the pockets of resistance are too many to be controlled. And that actually promises transnational space will not very easily. The emergence of a Stalin or even look at the way Hong Kong is still holding China at bay. They are still using, there is something called world opinion. There is still, it's important, so they wouldn't actually send army into Hong Kong. and they would have done it 30 years back. So transnational locations definitely hold potential for resistance.
Thanks, sir. There is another question in the chat box. May I read it for you?
Yeah, please, please.
Transnationals and capital flow to the homeland, signify their sustained link with homeland. Then how can we say that transnationalism excluded myth of homeland, unlike diaspora? Clear, sir? Should I repeat it?
No, I understand. I made a distinction between transnational space and diasporic space. And the basic distinction here is there is a kind of ethnocentrism in the very idea of diaspora. You see, look at Jewish diaspora, which is the original diaspora. You see, there is a certain idea of homeland, which in a way, finally, it actually emerges in Israel. You see, it makes them, hold together. So the remittances, the kind of transfer of capital, this may be a phenomenon across what you call globalized communities everywhere. But then what essentially defines transnational kind of a space and makes it distinct from the diasporic space, diasporas are actually identity conscious. They are not nomadic. They are not, for example, the African Congolese writer saying, I have a home only in language. You see, that's not what a Gulf Malayali or even an American Malayali would say. You see, there is a very interesting incident. Ardina Pavire says his wife is an architect historian, and she has a friend in Madurai who is a temple priest. When she came to Madurai, wanted to meet him. She was told he is in US. He is actually now regularly visits. I've seen a lot of priests in California. See, diasporas want their gods, their religious rituals. There are temples in America, and of course, mosques, churches, etc. So this is the diasporic space. They are trying to actually build a replica of their homeland within the host land. This is not what transnationals do, who is more actually into a more secular kind of space where perhaps he finds identity as not a locus, which would actually, finally, there is no search for identity. One of the questions in English we always ask, quest for identity. It's very difficult to configure this question of quest for identity in lots of writers who are actually now writing in transnational kind of location. Benjamin, a Malayali novelist, writes, look at Jasmine Days, Mulla Pukar, look at that. Or T.D. Ramakrishnan writing about Sri Lanka and then Africa. Look at this.
Okay, do we have any more questions?
Sir, can I ask you?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So, some years back, we had an essay prescribed
yes,
for teaching. It was by Sachidanandan, poet Sachidanandan. And there he had dealt with the notions of globalization and internationalism. And when he about it, it was very clear that he favored internationalism and slightly deprecated, or rather he disapproved of globalization. Now, in the rainbow that emerges from this blurring of boundaries of nation states, where would you place transnationalism?
Can you repeat the last sentence? In that rainbow of what?
In this rainbow of in the rainbow that emerges from the blurring of boundaries of nation states, where would you place transnationalism? I mean, we have globalization, we have internationalism, and we have this concept of transnationalism as well.
In fact, maybe Sachidanandan, when he talked about internationalism, he meant something like transnationalism. That is what I tend to actually feel. I feel like, you see, from what you said. But if you talk of a spectrum, if you spectrum of colors, you see, definitely transnational will be the other end of, you see, if you locate the very solid nation state as the only source of identity, as of course, if you see it as something which validates all your, you see, self-validating kind of overarching presence, if that will be one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum will be the transnational, nomadic, and a kind of self which doesn't require an affiliation to the structures of the nation state, which particularly has a built-in kind of tendency to, in a way, as we have, I showed, to absolute kind of regulation, control, and you see, compartmentalize what part of you is Malayali, what part of you is a refugee, what part of you is, you see, the very idea that I am exhausted by one identity. If I am only Malayali, I have not lived in Kerala for the last 42 years. Though I have a house in Kerala, I live there for at least 2 to 3 months every year. You see, still, and I also have a daughter who lives in California. So when I actually see myself, there are options. This may not be true. There is, of course, a hierarchy operating right here as well. There are people who have no option. You see, that's where globalized transnational spaces also have built-in violence that I indicated at the beginning. But transnationalism is the space inhabited by a large number of you see, people who would see a nomadic kind of imaginary as constitutive of their inner core. They are constituted by that kind of nomadic, and you see, maybe they carry a passport, they have you see, maybe dual passport, or they may, but they may not. There are many artists, many filmmakers, a number of you see, more. It's that's why Appadure maybe mentions it's more of a dimension of imagination, from solid, you see, grounded reality to more an imaginary and conceptualized, you see, kind of nomadic, you see, dimension of the self. So I would put it at the other extreme of nation state.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, thanks a lot.
Yes.
We have 2 more questions on the chat box. One, I think you have already made clear. I read it. Is there any difference between transnationalism and diaspora? There is another question. What sense of consciousness of culture does transnational hold? Does culture play a prominent role in the identity of a transnational? I hope we have to wind up after these 2 questions.
Very, very brief answers. Between transnational and diaspora, I already made it very clear. Diaspora harks back to a kind of ethnic core, and also the idea, the myth of the homeland is central to a diasporic community. So travel always, even when they don't go back, they always think they are here only for a while and they will return. So transnational does not aspire to a return as they actually think the present itself is what they inhabit, and language is what actually allows them to be themselves. The second question, see, culture has been central to the conceptualization of transnational spaces, mainly because language, as I said, is part of the flow. You see, the question of language has become extremely important. You see, Spanish is almost now the second language in the United States. Maybe we have you see, Hindi, Bengali, many of these languages within you see, the North American and the British. You see. So definitely the South is now part of what you call the global North. Look at, so if you look at cultural products, only yesterday we actually heard the news that Jellicut is now nominated for Oscar. Why should it make such a big news in headlines across Kerala media? There is a transnational space here where Oscar actually has a kind of, Oscar Awards. Definitely it's part of the Hollywood kind of marketing and many things. But then it also creates a space for a Malayali artist to belong to, not a regional or exclusively what we call a nation state sponsored national space. This actually is liberating if Jellicut Malayalam film can speak to the world at large. It in a way allows Malayalam to be a part of a larger transnational kind of. It's already there. The way I don't want to take more time. You see, the way translations of Malayalam novels are now going global or going transnational, I would say. They are becoming transnational kind of works. Nobody wants to go back to what Arachar is in Malayalam. They think Hangwoman is a book which actually they can read and understand. There's no Kerala there. In original Arachar, there was Malayalam, but in Hangwoman, there is not even Malayalam there. So, K.R. Meera is now inhabiting a transnational space. It's not regional. It's actually absolutely free from what we call anything bound by Kerala. Not even language appears there. So let it stop here. I can go on speaking, but very, very interesting questions. Thanks to all people who listened. And once more, I thank all the organizers for this very inspiring subject. It made me think. And also, I have been talking about some of these issues, allowed me to bring them together once again. So thanks to all of you, Dr. Aziz, Dr. Noufal, Mr. Abdul Samad. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, sir. There are some more questions, but I think we don't have time enough to attend them.
Yeah.
And this morning is going to be a remarkable time, and I thank you for spending your time with us. And now at 11:30, we are going to have another session by Professor Amith Kumar. Sir, would you like to continue with us, or?
I may be there for about 15 minutes, and then.
All right, sir. All right.
Yeah.
Anyway, I would like to thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
I would like to invite Ms. Sharifa Begum to chair the next session.
Hello, everyone. Am I audible? Hello? Yeah. Hello, everyone. Now, here we are actually in the second session of the one-day national seminar organized by the Department of English, PSMO College, Tirurangadi, on the topic Transnationalism, Nation States and the Global South, Literary and Cultural Dialogues. We really did have Professor EVR, who